I'm going to share with you the best and easiest way to root fig cuttings. This is one rooting video you definitely want to watch. I also will share with you the reason why so many people fail at rooting, so you won't repeat the same mistakes and so you can achieve the best possible results. Here we go. You're going to need some potting mix, some parafilm M. It's always good to have a Sharpie on hand, some sort of a knife. I like to use my grafting knife, some elastic bands or something to tie with, something to stir if you're going to use a diluted rooting hormone, and water. And you'll need some sort of a container. We're going to talk about this. And of course, your cuttings. Okay, here we go. So, first you need a bag like this, not a Ziploc bag. This bag, as simple as it may seem, has the right stuff for your rooting success. It's nice and deep, 8 inches in fact, so your roots can properly grow for a healthy uppotting in the future, and the right width, which will give you an early indication when your roots are sprouting from your cutting. The other advantage is the soil will always be wetter towards the bottom, and that's going to keep all that water away from our cutting, which is a key element to success. This bag is also the right thickness and has a convenient zip feature. And even though we're not going to use the zip feature for rooting, it makes a great bag for storing cuttings and holding your soil until you're ready to put the cutting inside. You'll see what I mean. I'll leave a link in the comments where you can get this exact bag if you like. Next, we have our planting medium. You know, I've seen other videos where people are mixing all kinds of things and using all kinds of material to achieve the right kind of moisture, moss, vermiculite, and other things. But using this method, you're not going to need any fancy planting medium because we're going to stop our soil and cutting from drying up so we can achieve success. I'm going to use ProMix HP here, and while I usually add a little bit of perlite to everything because it makes the medium a little bit more airy, I'm not going to do it this time because I don't even think the extra perlite is necessary. And anyways, much like most potting mixes, ProMix HP already contains perlite. You will need to slightly wet your planting medium so that it's moist, but not too wet. It should feel damp. Watch as I pass this tissue on it. It's not too wet. You could go a little bit wetter if you like, but not much more. You will also need some parafilm M. Some people prefer buddy tape, which I guess is fine, but personally, I always use parafilm M. You'll also need an elastic band or something to wrap the bag around the cutting. Lastly, of course, you will need the cutting. Okay, so let's talk about the cutting and the number one reason why people fail in rooting. You see, people don't understand the difference between a cutting and a plant. If we look at this plant here, we can see the leaves, and we obviously know that this is an established plant and has many roots under the soil line. Leaves work like solar panels and absorb the light to give the plant some needed nutrients and energy. And the plant calls on the roots to draw up water from the soil to replenish that lost energy. Think of it as quenching its thirst. This kind of works the same as a person working or exercising in the sun and getting thirsty. Now, here we have a cutting. Essentially, it's a stick. No leaves to absorb sun and no roots to drink water from the soil. People put this cutting in wet, soaking soil, which is bad enough. Then they start pouring water and pouring more water until this wood starts to rot and the soil gets filled with fungus gnats that start eating the wood Guys, don't kill your cuttings, especially if they've been sitting in somebody's fridge for months before they were shipped out to you. The minute the cutting is cut from the tree, it starts losing its health. And while fig cuttings can generally be pretty hardy and have been known to last in a fridge for months if they are properly stored, however, there's no denying that a cutting's best health comes the minute that it's cut from the tree. That's why I never take cuttings until I'm ready to ship it out or start rooting it. Let's talk about preparing the cutting. So if your cutting is fresh, like my cutting here, or even if your cutting has been only in the fridge a few days, you may not need to add any cleaning to it. But if your cutting is old or if you have concerns about mold, you can make a 10% bleach to water solution and lightly brush your cutting with a toothbrush. If you take this route, make sure you don't damage the bark on your cutting. I generally don't like this because all my cuttings are fresh and I don't need to do it unless I've gotten a cutting from somewhere far or it's been on the road for a long time. All right, now we're ready to score the cutting. So take a clean, sharp knife. I like to use my grafting knife and make 2 or 3 scores below the bottom node. Finally, we have the question to use or not use a rooting hormone. Frankly, there are a lot of positives and negatives about rooting hormone. Some people say it helps initially, then the cutting does worse later on and would have been better without it, and some people swear by it. I generally sometimes will use a little bit, but diluted in water. So I'll pour some rooting hormone in water and then dip the bottom of the cutting before sticking it in the potting mix. I'm not sure if this rooting hormone is fresh enough, so I'll just do a couple, and then the rest I'll simply soak the bottom in water just to get the cutting started, and I'll keep the top dry. If you are using a rooting hormone, make sure you don't stick the cutting right in the bottle because you'll contaminate it. Pour some out and use it in a bowl. Let's talk about planting the cutting. First, you'll need to make sure you don't put your cutting in the soil upside down. It's easy to tell when your cutting has a tip like this. That's the top and that's the bottom. But if your cutting looks like this, you need to make sure it goes in the right way. Here's how to tell. Look here. I call this the smiley face. Usually you could see the top and the bottom of the smiley face. Also, the node should be above the smiley face. And look at this line. It should also be above the smiley face and below the node. Now, you want to make sure you have at least 2 nodes under the soil. Some people can get away with 1 node under the soil, but the more the merrier, because each node in your potting mix actually increases your chances of success. Then you need at least 1 node above the soil line for this method. Begin wrapping your fig cutting from the top to the bottom, making sure to have only 1 layer of parafilm over the areas that have nodes, so you don't hinder the growth from that node. Your cutting should start to sprout from these nodes if all goes well. Also, make sure you're stretching the parafilm so it's a thin layer that's going around your cutting. And make sure you are completely covering the entire area of the cutting that will be above the soil. If your parafilm breaks, don't worry. Just keep going where you left off. Make sure to stretch as you're wrapping. This is very important because the complete coverage of the top part of your cutting will prevent it from drying up and failing. You want to go right down to just before the node that will be under the soil making sure not to go over that node. It's okay if a little bit of parafilm is under the soil. Make sure to label your bag with the variety you are propagating. Do it as soon as possible. There's nothing worse than having a successful cutting and not knowing what it is, except having a failed cutting and not knowing what that was. Put multiple labels per cutting if you can. Here I'm using a Sharpie for the bag, and I will also add additional labels when I up pot in the spring. Now fill your bag with the potting mix, about 6 inches, maybe a little bit more. You may need something to prop up your bag during this process. Now, insert your cutting. I like to use a pencil first to prepare the hole for the cutting. Make sure the bottom edge of the parafilm is under the soil line and put your elastic or tie around the cutting. I repeat, no exposed cutting above the soil. Now, the moisture in your bag will not evaporate, so you will not need to replenish the moisture until your cutting starts putting out roots and leaves. The top of your cutting is protected with the parafilm, and the bottom of your cutting is protected in the bag that contains damp, not wet, planting medium. At this point, I like to put them in some sort of a shallow container with a heat pad underneath so it doesn't give too much heat. Your cuttings in this state don't need sun or light of any kind. Like I said before, the only thing that needs light is the leaves on a plant. And as we see here, right now, there's no leaves. Even if you get roots showing in your bag, you still don't need light. In fact, roots shouldn't even see light. So if you see the roots, it might be a good idea to put some foil around your bag to block that light until you're ready to up pot. You may see some moisture on the edge of your bags. That's a good sign. Your roots should develop before seeing growth from the top, but in some cases, you may see top growth first, and that could just be because the roots haven't reached the edge of the bag or other factors. But if that happens, just be patient. And if you have the right moisture level in your bag, you should see roots soon. Good luck.